Welcome back to Aether Hour, everybody. I am your host, Conrad Franz, joined as always by Dmitriy Kalugin and a massive guest, somebody who I'm sure most of our audience is familiar with, somebody sort of a preeminent voice in the dissident right commentariat space, somebody who's been posting a lot actually about, the current status and state of Christianity in America, documenting his own sort of journey towards the truth, towards the correct liturgical service to attend every Sunday, as it were. So we're going to introduce him in a second, but we're going to be discussing all of those topics, the religious landscape in America, the current state of the country as it sort of collapses, into whatever it's collapsing into right now, the topic of Antifa, the topic of, demographics. These things are going to be on the table. But before he introduces himself, Dmitry, how are you doing?
Doing amazing, Conrad. This has been long in the works, I suppose. We've always wanted to speak to this particular figure, and without further ado, I think I will introduce Elijah Schaffer, who honestly is probably one of the best guests we could ever have on the show, frankly, just because of his particular positioning between, let's just say, the old media space. He is very truly, or at least he was on some way on this crossroads of many different streams of thought, and he has really been collaborating with many various people, and he still remains very active in the online space and on, of course, Rift TV, his popular media program platform. So Elijah, maybe tell some of the audience about yourself, especially those unfamiliar with you. Of course, to introduce yourself, feel free to give us as many details as you'd like. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, well, what a great introduction. I feel a bit overwhelmed by that. I feel like you've been more generous than you probably should have, considering, especially right now, I just see myself as a sinner in need of God. And I don't say that lightly. I really, truly am battling things. And no, it's not being gay, like some people keep saying in my comments. It's battling things that are actually serious. And I do believe that there is a spiritual battle for my life that's much bigger than just saying I'm battling sin or battling temptation. I feel like I am confident that for some reason, through divine intervention, God is calling me to a place of peace with Him and a confidence in walking with Him that is shocking to me, because I would consider myself the chief of all sinners in many ways, and somebody who saw being sensitive to God sort of as a weakness up until recently. And there's no other explanation for how my heart's changing than a miracle. And it's beautiful. It's difficult. And outside of that, my background, I've been a investigative journalist, a commentator, somewhat of a polemist in the space for about 8-9 years now. I got my start in Los Angeles, like many of us did, exposing liberals, exposing woke nonsense. It was to the extent that, popular accounts like Libs of TikTok is sort of a progeny of myself. If you look back at our messages from the very beginning, she's like, you're the inspiration and why I started this. And I'm the first big account that shared her stuff. And so I sort of had tried to engineer the space in terms of, getting these liberal videos, which I now regret, onto big shows like Dave Rubin and Glenn Beck, onto Daily Wire shows, normalizing the exposure of liberals in the conservative establishment. And that was sort of what I did for a couple of years. And it was a little too successful. I think we've moved on past that. And then I went into, by accident, investigative journalism. I, filmed Kyle Rittenhouse killing several people, one of which was a Jewish pedophile, and, was involved in that trial as a witness. And I was involved in both impeachments of Donald Trump, with my work being used. Donald Trump actually, at the first day as the violence started in 2020, that we're all familiar with, the BLM, kind of like I rose to notoriety because he thanked me because I filmed murder that day. And he, said, thanks to the work of Elijah Schaffer, we wouldn't have known how violent and bad this George Floyd protest was. And that sort of kicked off actually a year of like people becoming sort of riot streamers. And I feel like, God's really used me to sort of, help expose liberals, that to sort of inspire people to expose the violence. And, goes down even to COVID. I got in a famous war with Ben Shapiro, who famously said anyone who doesn't get the vaccine is a dope. We're stupid. And that was an argument with me. And that was a very famous and big argument that we had together. And sort of pushed a lot of these people in the movement behind the scenes to not get vaccinated. And now we move ahead and we worked really hard to try to show that Russia is not the aggressor that people say they were. I got my episodes removed while I was at Blaze TV for promoting propaganda, they said, for trying to explain the truth about what was happening in Ukraine the day the violence broke out, the day the, military operation started, all the way now to being unfollowed by a large majority of the establishment, and even recently being kicked out of one of the largest groups on the right because of my lack of support for the state of Israel. So that's like a pretty long summation. I've been investigated by the FBI. I have been arrested by the Secret Service twice. I have been investigated for wiretapping and espionage. I've had my phones lifted, bank records, personal identification taken through the Patriot Act. I've had my phones broken into and my signal and encrypted messages lifted. And I've been harassed and followed by the FBI and, had my neighbors harassed, no knock warrants, and had to live in safe house at one point because the FBI was mad at me for actually filming the start of the violence on January 6th with Ray Epps. They didn't like that I knew that he started the riot. So they then investigated me for, being a treasonist, basically sedition. And now God's brought me through all of that. It's a very long intro, but it's been a long life. I now have a father of 2 kids and a very sweet, lovely, and beautiful wife. And I am a very broken man, very hardened, seen a lot of people killed. I'm not like a soldier. I don't have PTSD from war, but it's been a hard and a brutal and a difficult life. My best friend sued me for millions of dollars and tried to set me up in a, Me Too situation. And we're unsuccessful in that. Been slandered, dragged through the mud, had my reputation sort of just destroyed by these, what I thought were my good friends. And they took it to the court and, God saved me legally. He saved me physically. And I have repaid him by no means. And I think now's the time of reconciliation. So I don't know if you guys have those long of intros, but I don't know. We were going to talk about a lot of other things, but I feel like that's a good summation of a long political history.
Well, yeah, we wanted to talk about, I think more than a lot of our guests, this topic is a lot, your, sort of whole personal journey is actually very relevant to the entire conversation we're trying to have. And, I congratulate you on the humble mindset, I guess, with which you're approaching your faith journey. Because I think a lot of us wish that when we started out on this, we were more humble about it. Because, then God hits you with the lessons you really need to humble you. And I think, at least myself, I've certainly been hit with some of those. So I commend you for the attitude that you're going at it with. And, I consider myself somewhat of an investigative journalist, someone that travels around the world covering these things. And yeah, this stuff is sometimes hard to talk to. I was just in the Donbass region and I just talked to people who had seen like dozens of their neighbors killed by Ukrainians in Chasiv Yar, and they couldn't even finish talking to me about it. They were shaking and crying. So, actually then seeing people killed and seeing, the things that happen, obviously it's a real issue that people confront, and it kind of sobers you up. So, yeah, I guess, with all of that just said, where do you consider yourself in the Christian world right now? How do you see Christianity in America as it grows, as it shrinks in certain places, as certain things are embraced, as certain things are perhaps becoming reviled? What is your kind of survey of the Christian landscape as, a white American Christian who is just trying to find the truth?
That's a really good question. And thank you for going out and showing the other side of a very brutal and costly conflict, of which to this day I'm convinced there is a non-white, non-Christian sacrificing the lives of our boys. It's another brother war that we don't need. And the Russian-Ukraine conflict is heartbreaking. One of the main reasons why I voted for Donald Trump was because he said he would end the war on day one. And I fell for it again, for lack of better words. And I know he's not perfect and he can't control the world per se, but he can end a war in Israel. Why can't he end a war between Christians? It's a mess, and my heart goes out to the families of both the Ukrainians and the Russians, the innocent lives and the boys that are brought into this battle that was completely avoidable. So I just want to denote that I think it's a satanic battle of a God, a Jesus-hating, I should say, individual who is very corrupt and is willing to let Christians be killed and kill each other in the name of this gay globalist regime that has fought for its own survival post-World War II. But anyways, it's interesting talking about God and faith on a podcast. I haven't been doing this for a very long time. And it's difficult because I feel like so many people in this space weaponize and use their faith as a tool to sell t-shirts, for lack of better words, or just to emulate their favorite podcaster who tells them they've got to join this church or that church. And a lot of this has become, I call it like political Catholicism has become very popular, where a lot of people get baptized into the Catholic Church, it seems, that are young, and they do it to sort of be accepted in the dissident right movement. But then their hearts don't appear to be changing towards God. And I'm not condemning or judging them. It just feels so vicious. It feels so malicious. And they just, you got to ask yourself, with the fruit and on the tree, are we changing religions? Is this about changing religions? Is this about changing churches and liturgy? Or are we on a mission right now of spiritual enlightenment, that God is waking up the hearts of young men and women to be more like him? That's really important, because I don't think changing liturgy is ultimately what God was after. And I could be wrong, and I might be in a mature state. I think it looks like God's after our hearts, and he's after the core of who we are and what we develop into and become, so that he can use us for his purpose. And you know what? I'm going to be honest. I don't know what my purpose here on earth is. And I know the Protestants give an explanation. It's to know God and to seek to know God. But what does it mean to know God? Soon I'm going to start crying and popping benzos like Jordan Peterson. I'm starting to ask, well, what is God and what is what? In his Kermit the Frog voice. I know he's sick, so I shouldn't be joking about him, but I
it's like, well, I love God. And it's like, well, who is God? And then he starts crying like, you're right, I don't know. And it's just like, well, you're sort of asking the right questions, but also I feel like, Jordan Peterson, his whole career has been like leading him up to the Jesus thing, and he can't quite do it. So, we pray for him.
Yeah. And I think that's sort of like what I hope to not do in this journey is I want to arrive at truth. And I have real questions and I'm seeking real answers. And I've seen a lot of people real concerned about whether I choose the Catholic or the Orthodox church, but I'm under the impression that God will lead me to his church. And right now, what I need to work on is my character, because, the Bible lays out ways that we are and we are not supposed to live. And I would say a lot of my life reflects the actions and the ways we're not supposed to live. And I believe that it's led me to a place of emptiness. I have a nice house, I have a nice car, a family, I have a company, I have a new company. I have, gotten in very good shape recently. I mean, obviously, there's always going to be someone out there with a nicer house, a nicer car, and a better body. But I mean this not in a way than just like, I have what people say you should acquire when you are essentially successful, or, even have reach, right? There's rich people who don't even have, influence or whatever. I don't know if I'm influencing people, but if I am, what am I influencing them for, right? What am I influencing them to do? What, to just hate people who don't think like them? To just be mad that there's replacement of the white race? I mean, yeah, that's happening. But what? So what? Because we're being replaced, we're just supposed to be miserable? Like, what culture are we preserving? What does it mean to preserve the Christian, Western European ethos? What is that? And I think these are the questions that have got me down a path of realizing that just because I understood that evangelicalism in a large part is a lie, and it's a political tool meant to prop up Israel, it takes very good-hearted people and takes advantage of them, and weakens the definition of Christ's body, right? By lying about the promise being by DNA. It's sort of its own racial superiority religion. And it sort of makes Christians not at the level of the people who have rejected Christ, and makes you, Judeo-Christian, which means that you're going to be partnering with people who think Christ is burning in feces and semen, right? That's what the Talmud says. So I don't want to partner with wickedness. I don't want to be around the world. I already suffer with worldliness. I'm already a carnal person. I'm even looking at the nice things God has, you could say, blessed me with. And right now they feel like a prison, because these things are expensive and they're a lot to maintain. And it's like, I actually just want to make less money and spend time with my family and God. And I feel trapped by the quote unquote successes that I've had in this world. And yet I felt disillusioned because I felt lied to by the church I was baptized into. And I realized I completely abandoned God. And that is a scary place to be, to have responsibility, expectations on yourself, and to be in a place to where, and then religious people, I'm sorry, I've just had such a bad experience. Like a lot of people who know what I'm talking about, a lot of the Protestants have just, man, Joel Webben was on my show. He's a great pastor and made some maybe like locker room talk jokes. And they just, you're going to hell and this and that. I'm like, what is this? What is this? So if I am going to hell, why are you just telling me like that? Why don't you explain to me or reach out and be like, hey, I'm worried about you? Or why don't you even ask if I'm a Christian? Because maybe I'm not. And try to hold me to standards that I'm not even held to. So what is this? And I let a lot of that kind of, experience with Christians, and I even a lot of Orthodox and Catholic I know, man, they're just judgmental, right? And not in a way it's like, you're just sinning and you're a sinner. It's like, okay, but what? Why are you telling me this? And I think it took a divine intervention on a plane to where I felt the Spirit of God descend upon me, be I'm not even joking. It was like my heart was a rock and I was bitter and I was angry at the world and empty and really sick. And I'm really sick and tired of people right now too. I'm just exhausted by humans. But I believe that I felt God speak to me, and I hope this is theologically sound, but I felt God speak to me that a troubling time is coming. And if I'm not right with God, I'm going to die. And I don't know why. And I'll never forget it. It's like, you've got to get right with God or you'll die. I don't know if that means I'm going to kill myself, which by the way, I'm not going to do that. But I'm saying, does that mean that something's going to get so hard that I'm going to kill myself? Does it mean I'm going to lose my family? Or what does that mean? And oddly enough, I felt peace from that premonition and that warning that was like, okay, well, I guess there's only one option. I've got to follow God. And I asked God in the moment, Christians are mean to me. They're mean. They're the meanest people I know. I'm not even joking. I'm not joking. At that point, they were. I'll explain how I've seen a different side of things, right? Just so cruel. Just pick me apart and don't offer any help, And you're just like, cause I'm around a lot of kind of Christianish people because, I work in conservative politics. So you're just around a lot of Jews and conservative Christians. And I'm just like, why are you guys so cruel? This isn't the heart of, I don't even want to be held to your standards. I'm cruel to each other, A Christian sins or something and they just throw them under the bus. It's like, bro, that's a human being. That's supposed to be your brother in Christ. That's how you treat your brothers. I don't want to know how you treat your enemies. That's horrifying. And this is not a podcast where I'm going to be picking apart the church. That was my vision of it, right? And it didn't matter if you were Catholic, Orthodox, or Protestant. These people were just, become Catholic, become Reformed, become Orthodox. Meanwhile, they're just judging me on the sidelines, not helping my life and not offering to help my life. They're just it felt like they were like, I definitely don't want to be on this team because this looks annoying. This is and I think a lot of people feel that way in the world. I'm genuinely, Christian people need to really think about their PR because it's a lot of bad apples are really representing us to the world. And it's very unfortunate. However, I felt like God told me the same thing. You cannot, I'm like, Lord, I'm unsavable. I'm too hard of heart. I can't become better because I'm too messed up, inside. Again, the way I think about the church, the way I think about people, there's no way I'm going to change because I've seen too much and I'm too demoralized and too black-pilled to have the motivation to start planting the seeds in the field. I can't even do it. It's like God right there is just okay, well, let me give you some supernatural, that's all I can define it as, supernatural relief. And apart from me, you can't do that. You are too far gone apart from me, but maybe you're not asking for it, but it's but here you go. Here's kind of a new heart. And I don't know what the theology or what the explanation of that is, but it was all of a sudden I realized I could be saved. And Christians are still mean to me. But however, when I felt like God called me, he's like, use your platforms, start planting the seeds and move towards me. And that's also going to be having to be humble. And you're going to need to go ahead and humiliate yourself. This was a weird thing, but I felt God tell me, literally humiliate myself. I'm going to have my former self is going to think what I'm doing is stupid, but I'm going to need to go use my platforms and just be vulnerable with people and explain, hey, I am messed up. And I don't want people thinking I'm like this guy who turned his life to God yesterday and is now lecturing people. And I'm not trying to come across like that here. I'm not trying to come across what's my testimony or something people ask. It's I'm in it, it's just beginning. And I'm not telling anyone to do anything. I just am hey, everyone, usually I just use my platforms to be racist. No, I'm kidding. But I a little bit. But jokes aside, I use my platforms to spread a mission, you know? And I don't really use it to talk about God. And the people that talk about God, I get annoyed by sometimes. And so I just started opening up and, just kind of like, hey, something I guess to use biblical language. It's like, I've been trying to put wine into old wineskins and they've been bursting, but somehow God sort of took my wineskin when I was sleeping and replaced it with a new one. And for some reason now, as I'm pouring wine into it, it's not bursting and it looks like this looks promising, right? It looks like we might actually be able to have enough wine inside to party. Like I don't think we've gone this far.
Well, you've basically received the greatest miracle there is, because we're Orthodox Catholics, have this stuff. I could tell you a million stories of things from the lives of the saints or people that I know that have been healed of horrible diseases, that have witnessed holy people levitating or witnessed miraculous and incredible supernatural events. But the scriptures and the saints, they tell us that all of those miracles pale in comparison to the true miracle, which is when the hard heart of a sinner is turned to God. And a lot of what you're saying was reminding me of, Psalm 50, which is one of our favorite Psalms to pray, where it says, the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart, God, thou will not despise. That's sort of what it sounds like happened. You didn't, you may not have been quote unquote not sinning, or you may not have been doing the right thing or even going to the right church per se, but you had a broken and contrite heart. And for that, God gave you the greatest gift of all, which is humility. And like you said, the understanding that you not only need to be saved, but can be saved, of course, because, Jesus Christ didn't just, not to call out the Calvinists, but he didn't just die for the elect. He died for everybody, every single one of us. And I think the fact that you kind of have that moment where it was pinpointed, or that was made clear to you, I mean, that's powerful, man. And I think, and then the crazy thing where you said, or I was, it almost scared me a little bit that you're saying the same thing, is, when you said that you're going to die, I'm going to die in the future. And if I don't have faith, things are going to be bad. Well, Metropolitan Neophytos of Morphu, who we love on our show, he's sort of like our spiritual father here on the show. I went and met him in Cyprus last year. It took a long journey to go see him out in the middle of nowhere. And, he basically said, he's like, look, when the Third World War really starts and when things really start to come down the pipe, I mean, God's going to take some people away that wouldn't have been able to make it, who didn't have faith, who didn't have, who weren't strong enough in their faith to withstand what we're about to withstand. And, at a certain level, that even make, if you're one of these people with faith, it starts to, scare you. Like, am I one of those people? Is this what's going to happen? And we have to be prepared to die, right? And like you said, with, how you feel like all these material possessions are sort of keeping you down. I've spent enough time around monastics enough to know that, yeah, like actually being impoverished and truly having no attachment to worldly things is actual freedom. And, monasticism isn't for me. I love women too much, unfortunately, and meat. But I do understand that my monk friends are at sort of an ontological level more free. And when the bad times happen, they're going to be positioned in a lot better way than me and my comfy house, air conditioning and nice car and everything like you were talking about. So you're really speaking my language here, man. And I really appreciate you for, laying that all out for the audience. Cause, we're an Orthodox show, but this isn't like, most of our show isn't, getting into where it really connects with personal praxis. So I do appreciate you for being real with us there.
Yeah, man, thank you. And appreciate that. I'm sort of throwing a buckshot, right? And just kind of seeing what sticks. Because there's a lot of areas of my life that are not submitted to God, right? And I don't feel like I am just, have this instant conversion. I wonder, and I don't know, maybe you can answer, that conversion is a process. I don't know if that's true, but it feels like there's going to be a lot of shedding, a lot of difficulty ahead. And on top of that, there's going to be a watershed moment where we'll see if the testing will prove that the conversion is real, because I am in such a strange position, I've got such a complicated life. While I'm trying to build this company, I work with my investors and we're starting an entirely new company called PatriotRx.com. I put a lot of money into it. It's a sister company of a very large pharmaceutical company with just, drugs for men like peptides and TRT and finasteride and just cool stuff. We're reinventing drugs. People don't know my background is in genetic engineering, biochemistry, sort of what I professionally am trained in. Yeah. And so, it's a huge reason why I knew that the COVID vaccines weren't good because I looked at the sequencing. I understand chimeras. I understand mRNA technology, and I have worked with it, and I feel like God has put me in a very unique position where I got that. I'm suffering right now because, I was supposed to speak at CPAC Australia and my family was headed out there. And, I got banned from entering the country and for political persecution reasons. That country is home. I'm a resident of that country and I am currently separated from my family, not for any relational reasons, but due to legal reasons. And the rest of my family lives out there in Australia and I can't see, I'm not even able to see my kids right now. So, as a father, I'm crushed. As a, husband, I mean, you can't be intimate remotely. I mean, you can do some things, but, so it's like I'm sexually frustrated, emotionally crushed. I'm at an impasse where it feels like people in my life don't understand how many people I deal with, on a daily basis between several companies and, side things that I do and work with that it's like, a lot of people think they're more important maybe than they are in my life. And I'm exhausted. There's just too many people to deal with every day. I'm not trauma dumping. I'm pointing to the fact that this is a very pressing time, Like I mentioned, I just lost my main revenue source personally due to my positionings on Israel. And so I've taken a financial, my car was just stolen a few weeks ago from in front of my house, a brand new car. And, it turned out that they gapped the insurance. So I didn't even know that. They didn't renew my insurance that month. They canceled it that month because apparently my wife didn't update her ID, which we can't because her ID is a federal ID. She's a green card holder from Australia. And her wallet was stolen out of our other car at a dog park. So we're waiting for a replacement. So we were a victim of crime. So we're unable to update her ID while we're waiting for a return. So then they canceled our insurance. Then my car gets stolen. And so then I'm out over $100,000. So I lost the majority of my savings there and my car. And, a week later got terminated from a very lucrative deal I had over my political beliefs, which has happened several times in my life. And I'm very accustomed to that. This one was particularly bad. The next day after that happened, I was trying to figure out what to do. And then Charlie Kirk was murdered. Of course, that has been devastating to everybody. That's just been devastating to the entire community. In fact, it's been devastating to the country of the United States. And, that weighed heavy on me. And about a week after that, we're banned from Australia and my family gets separated from me. And, I get dragged through the media by the entire Protestant community comes against me that week after I have Joel Webb on right as my car gets stolen, drags me through the mud, writing articles and videos and podcasts. I'm just getting harassed by these people. And I'm just going, this is just absolutely freaking insane. Like this is just insane, And that goes on top of just normal life. You got to go to the gym, you got to pay your bills, you got to, manage your employees and, not everyone's easy. And that's all, in life and business, right? So business is complicated. And, while launching a second company, it's just I'm just thinking but it dawned on me the day that Charlie was murdered. I'm like, and it stuck with me as things have gotten harder. It stuck with me. I'm like, but I'm not murdered. I know it sounds dumb. It's yeah, this is all I've had friends kill themselves going through less than what I'm currently encountering right now. And that's only what I can tell you. You know what I mean? It's what I can't tell you and the things that are too interpersonal that are happening, it's bad. It's just stressful. It's like I'm getting hit on every single side of my life, financially, criminally, legally, getting lawsuit threats from powerful people, powerful Jewish individuals over my investigation of Charlie's murder, which has been really bothering me. There's just so much that I'm like, but Charlie's dead, he's been shot. He got sacrificed on a field in the shape of a menorah, which is bizarre. And I don't believe the official narrative. I don't think that they've had enough conclusive evidence to prove that, the FBI. And, who am I? I'm just an investigative journalist who's gotten some of the biggest cover-ups correct and helped expose massive cover-ups at my own cost on a federal level, So maybe that's important. Maybe people like myself and the guy who killed Osama bin Laden, maybe we know a thing or two about this situation and know that this is an odd situation. And so, yeah, it weighs heavy. But I'm still alive. You're still alive. So why are we still here? It looks like Charlie Kirk knew why he was here. And I think that he was living authentically because of the way his views were changing on some of the main things he was getting wrong. And we know that, right? we're not going to talk a lot about that, but Charlie was living authentically. And like all authentic people, he got some things wrong. Probably still made some bad decisions, did some of the wrong things. You know, he's a human being. And I can't get the image of him being shot in the neck. I can't get it out of my head. I think about it every single day. And when I go to bed, I'm tormented because it's being covered up like Epstein. Like we're not, and the people closest to him are suspiciously okay with everything. And I'm just not, I'm not okay with it. I'm a Turning Point approved speaker. I'm on their website, personally approved by Charlie. I've spoken on large stages in front of 10,000 people with Charlie. I have done tours with Turning Point, and they called me, 2 weeks before he was murdered to say, like, basically, hey, let's fix our relationship. And, because I was getting blacklisted over my views on Israel. And it's like, they invited me to their big conference. And I'm like thinking things were going in the right direction. And then, I'm excited. I'm like, oh, I'm going to be, reconnecting with Turning Point. The establishment's changing. That'll help my network and everything's good. And I have, my car and my house and everything. And then everything fell apart in like 10-day period. Everything fell apart in my life. And I actually thought for the first time last night, I was driving home and I go, God, if all this is happening because this is what I needed to turn to you. Because I don't directly relate. I'm like, I wasn't like on a plane being like, oh, my life, woe is me, woe is me. My life's bad. Okay, I'm going to turn to God. So I have like, a coping mechanism. Mm-hmm. I was just sitting on a plane, reading a book when this change happened. Just actually coming back from El Salvador. But I actually dawned on me, like, maybe I sound stupid thinking this, but I'm like, life was so good and it doesn't make sense. So many bad things happen. And I'm saying Charlie was murdered was directly to affect me or God had Charlie murdered, or something like that. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying like, the police said that the car theft was a targeted hit and it was professional. They took out the GPS trackers and they shipped that thing off to another country. They think it was a targeted hit, police did from what they looked into and just think it was I just wonder, if sometimes God allows bad things to happen because that's sometimes what it takes for us to ask the question of what the hell am I even here for?
Thank you so much for listening to the free preview of this incredible Aether Hour episode. Be sure to get behind the paywall to hear the rest of this very deep, heartfelt, real talk conversation with Elijah Schaffer about faith, about, Dmitriy and I, we get into some Orthodox issues, of course. The papacy comes up. We talk a little bit about some other things, but it's, this is a very, in many ways, a spiritual conversation, which you don't really have too much on here. Of course, we're not spiritual guides. Obviously, run everything by your spiritual father, by your priest, by your godparents, and everything like that. But, I think this was a good talk, and Elijah is one of the many sincere young Christian men that is drawn to the Orthodox faith. So please keep him in your prayers, keep us in your prayers, and pray for the church that we could continue to be the ark for, at this point, millions, hundreds of thousands, millions of people that are sincerely seeking truth with contrite and broken hearts. So again, keep us in your prayers, keep Elijah in your prayers. And again, get behind the paywall to hear the rest of the conversation. It really helps us out. I know it sounds very shilly, very insincere to be like, oh, now get behind the paywall, but we haven't released a lot of paid content in a while. So we need, the show doesn't happen for free. This is, my full-time job. I need this to survive. So thank you again to everybody that supports. And we got a lot of great content coming down the road. So see you on the other side. God bless.